I was lounging on my porch, sipping iced tea and watching the sun sink behind the pines when Lisa roared up in her golf cart like a race car driver hooked on Chardonnay. "You and that Porch are dragging down property values," she snapped. I stood, flashed a grin, and said, "Guess I'd better round up the crew then." She thought I meant relatives. I meant the local biker gang I tinker with engines for. Now, I know what you're thinking. Hold up. How do you even pull that off without breaking some law? And how does she not catch on? Stick with me, because if I've learned anything since landing in this HOA-controlled suburban maze, it's that folks around here are experts at seeing only what suits them and ignoring what they can't wrap their heads around like me, or leather vests, or the idea of live and let live. I'm not from here. I inherited my aunt's house after she passed, lovely woman, had a quirky little-known collection and a killer recipe for key lime pie. She'd lived here 30 years without a single HOA gripe. Me? I was barely 2 weeks in when the first letter hit. Your porch furniture fails to meet community aesthetic standards. We're talking 2 rickety wicker chairs, a sun-bleached cushion, and a coffee table that survived a breakup and a tropical storm. Apparently, that was enough to offend the Lisa-led taste police. I laughed it off at first. Come on, it's just a porch. I wasn't hosting raves or spray painting it hot pink. But the letters kept coming. Then came the sneaky notes tucked in my mailbox, no postage. Then the icy glares when I walked my dog. It felt like I'd stumbled into a reality show reboot of Desperate Housewives, except the drama smelled like lavender and rose. I met Lisa face-to-face at my first HOA meeting. You know the type. Sharp blonde bob, sunglasses indoors, radiating an unearned sense of superiority you could slather on a bagel. She greeted me with a smile that screamed lawsuit waiting to happen and said she hoped I'd uphold the standards that made Willow Creek Estates a cut above. I told her I planned to breathe and maybe sit down sometimes. Apparently, that was asking too much. After that, it was game on. She started plastering photos of my porch on the neighborhood Facebook group, not with my name, but with captions like, "Is this the vibe we're going for?" and "Who brought the truck stop aesthetic?" It was obvious who she was gunning for. One post zoomed in on my team mug with the caption, "Is that liquor?" Someone commented, "Trashy behavior." Lisa hit like. Still, I didn't take the bait. I knew her playbook. React too soon, and you're playing her game. No, I had to bide my time. And while I waited, I started scheming. Let me be clear, I'm not some wild vigilante. I pay my bills, I don't slash tires, and my dog doesn't leave presents on your grass. But I spent 15 years wrenching in a motorcycle shop, and if those guys taught me anything, it's that payback rides best on 2 wheels with a side of burgers and loud pipes. I'd fix bikes for all sorts: weekend riders, old school vets, even a preacher who rolled with a cross on his handlebars. They weren't outlaws, just rowdy, tight-knit folks who'd return a favor when it counted. I'd comped repairs when they were strapped, lent out tools, even helped one guy rebuild his hog after a wreck. They didn't forget. So I made a few calls and said, "Got a little HOA drama brewing. Let's just say their schedules opened up fast." But I'm jumping ahead. The real tipping point hit 3 days before the porch showdown. Lisa strutted up in broad daylight, clipboard in hand, flanked by her 2 sidekicks, Diane and Janet, who looked like they ran a covert book club for passive aggression. She didn't knock, just marched onto my property like she owned it and said, "We've had complaints that your porch is being used as a hangout spot." I blinked. Isn't that the point of porches? She gave me that viper smile and said, "Not here. We strive for elegance, not tailgate vibes." Tailgate vibes. I didn't even have a cooler out there. She handed me a formal notice citing some obscure HOA rule about porches being limited to approved seating, 2 chairs max, no visible drinks. Drinks? She was coming for my tea. I asked, "What if I don't play along?" Her eyes gleamed. "Then the board may impose fines or pursue legal action for noncompliance." I glanced at Diane and Janet, nodding like synchronized bobbleheads, and that's when I smiled. Because right then, I knew she thought she'd won, and I also knew this was about to get fun. I took the notice, folded it neatly, and said, "Maybe you're right. Maybe I don't fit in here." Lisa's lips twitched into that half-smirk, half-round thing that looks like her face couldn't pick a side. She had no clue I'd already texted Tank and Spike, and the weekend was shaping up to be a rumble of engines and barbecue. As she sauntered back to her golf cart, she muttered loud enough for me to hear, "Some people just ruin everything." I waved. The kicker? She genuinely thought she was the hero. She didn't know most of the neighborhood already saw her as a tyrant in yoga pants, or that her monthly newsletter was a running gag in the group chat I'd quietly joined, or that her perfect little world was about to get spun upside down by a woman with a socket wrench, a porch, and a few fiercely loyal pals with a lot of horsepower. But just when I thought I had the edge, something threw me. That night, I found an envelope taped to my doorknob stamp. No handwriting, just a typed note inside. "You don't know who you're dealing with." That's when it hit me. Lisa wasn't just a pest. She was playing a darker game, and I wasn't the only one she'd gone after. I had no idea how far this went, but I was about to find out. That typed note sat on my kitchen counter, as cold and lifeless as the woman who probably printed it on the same PC she used to track HOA violations in Excel. I stared at it, then out at my porch, now stripped down to two sad, HOA-sanctioned chairs and a table that looked like it belonged in a dentist's waiting room. It felt like I was losing a silent battle no one else could see, except the weapons were newsletters and snarky social media posts. I could have backed off, played nice, blended in. But if Lisa thought she could spook me into submission, she clearly hadn't done her homework. By Monday, the fines started trickling in, not on paper yet. They were too slick for that, but via email from the HOA's compliance guy, Chad, who I'd never met, but pictured as a guy with no jawline and a permanent earpiece. The email listed my infractions, unapproved porch activity, non-compliant beverage containers, and a new one overly bright chair paint. My chairs were pastel, HOA-approved shades, but apparently too lively. Chad attached a PDF of recommended neutral tones that looked like a hardware store threw up beige. I didn't reply. I didn't pay. But I did swing by the store and buy a new outdoor pillow shaped like a pig in aviators. I plopped it right on one of the two allowed chairs. It wasn't furniture, so they couldn't touch it. Lisa saw it, I know, because she cruised by 3 times that afternoon, each pass slower, her eyes narrowing behind those giant sunglasses like she was trying to laser through my skull with pure scorn. She didn't say a word that day. She was plotting. Fine. So was I. Later that week, my neighbor Sarah stopped Bitwo houses down, always in baggy sweatshirts with snarky slogans, carrying the tire vibe of someone who'd endured too many HOA meetings and lived to tell. She handed me a jar of iced coffee and said, "Don't let her break you." She did this to the Wilsons last year, had a garden gnome out front, and boom, fines, notices, threats. They sold and left in 2 months. I thanked her and asked if anyone ever fought back. She shrugged. Most just cave or move. But you? I think you're different. That word stuck different. I wasn't trying to start a revolution. I just wanted to sip my tea, mourn my aunt, and live in peace. But now? Now it was personal. Lisa didn't just hate my chair, she hated anyone who didn't kneel to her made-up crown. And if she wanted a showdown, I had more grit than she bargained for. The next day, 3 more violation notices arrived. One for excessive outdoor talking. I'd taken a phone call outside. One for visible drink container, and one for unsanctioned social activity. That last one cracked me up like I was running an underground fight club on my porch. I pictured Lisa camped out in her living room, binoculars in one hand, wine glass in the other, ready to pounce if I so much as waved at a jogger. She wasn't just nosy, she was hooked on control. So I doubled down. I started taking all my calls on the porch, speaking just loud enough to be heard, but not loud enough for a noise complaint. I ordered the most ridiculous mugs I could find on Linnea's skull with daisies, a flamingo with a handle, even one shaped like a boot. Every day, a new one. I got a doormat that read, "Trespassers welcome." I wasn't breaking rules, I was tap dancing on their edges. And Lisa? She was unraveling. She stopped driving by and started walking, pretending to exercise while circling my house like a vulture with a spreadsheet. The neighbors started noticing. Some grinned. A few waved. One guy from down the street stopped by and said, "You've got more guts than I do." Lisa's like the HOA's attack, dog she never quits. I just smiled and said, "She hasn't met my backup yet." The backup was coming together, slow and steady. I called Tank, Spike, and Tara, three of my tightest biker friends who owed me big. They weren't trouble, but they had presence. Loud bikes, louder laughs, and a way of filling space that rattled fragile suburban nerves. I told them to swing by next Saturday. No laws broken, just a friendly visit. But before Saturday rolled around, I got another curveball. Friday afternoon, I came home to a flyer taped to my door. HOA Emergency Meeting Community Standards Vote. Agenda Item 1. Proposal to restrict front porch use and ban unapproved gatherings. I stared at it. She was trying to outlaw porch sitting unless she greenlit it. Lisa had gone full dictator. I showed up to the meeting with my pig pillow under one arm and a mug shaped like a cactus in my hand. The room hushed. Lisa looked smug. The vote started, and hands shot up faster than I expected. Fear's a hell of a motivator. People just wanted to stay off her radar. When Lisa announced, "The motion passes," she shot me a polished grin. I didn't blink. I nodded, stood, and said, "Guess it's time to call the crew." A few folks looked puzzled. Lisa looked wary, but it was too late. Texts were sent, plans locked in. The next morning, at exactly 10:47, the low growl of Harley engines echoed down the street, 15 of them, chrome gleaming, leather shining, cutting through the quiet like a storm. Lisa stood frozen in her driveway, robe and all, as the bikers rolled by like a parade of chaos. But that wasn't what shook her. It was what they brought with them, something she never saw coming. Because they weren't just here to ride. They were here to help. And that's when things really went sideways. The sound hit first to deep, rolling thunder that rattled windows and sent squirrels scampering. It started far off, like a distant squall, then grew closer, unmistakable. I told them 10:47, and they delivered. The engines roared as they rounded into our cookie-cutter cul-de-sac, a line of chrome and grits slicing through Willow Creek's pastel monotony like a tattoo on a wedding cake. I was on my porch, pig pillow propped up, mug in hand, when they pulled in. The neighbors' faces were priceless shock, curiosity, a pinch of fear. And Lisa? She stood rooted in her driveway, eyes wide, mouth half open, clutching a coffee cup like it was her last tether to reality. There were 15 of them. Some I'd known forever, others just owed me one, but they all knew why they were here. Tank was first off his bike, boots hitting the pavement like a warning shot. He nodded at me and said, loud enough for every nosy curtain to catch it, "Looks like you could use some help." I smiled and said, "Funny, I was thinking the same." Behind him, Spike opened his truck and hauled out a portable grill. Tara, who could out-talk and out-drink anyone, was already setting up a folding table. They moved like they'd done this before, smooth, relaxed, but deliberate. They set up in my driveway, not the porch, because we weren't breaking a single rule. That's what made it beautiful. Every soda can stayed unopened in a cooler. Every chair stayed off the grass. No loud music, just a small speaker humming classic rock low enough to dodge a citation. We even had garbage bags ready for cleanup. We looked wild, sure, but legally, we were saints. The cops showed up in 20 minutes flat. I saw it coming. Lisa wouldn't miss her shot. What I didn't expect was Officer Daniels, the same guy who'd handled Lisa's suspicious vehicle call that turned out to be a FedEx truck. He strolled up, took one look, and smirked. "Afternoon," he said. "Everything above board." Tank handed him a bottled water and said, "You bet, officer. Recycling's sorted too." Daniel scanned the scene, nodded, and said, "Carry on." Lisa watched from her porch, fuming, trembling, helpless. The neighbors started creeping out not long after. At first, it was just the bold ones. Sarah wandered over, sweatshirt on, sipping from her own mug and grinning like she'd just seen fireworks. "This is the most fun this place has had in a decade," she whispered. I handed her a burger and said, "Hang tight. Ribs are up next." Word spread like gossip at a bake sale. Soon, we had a dozen residents milling around, chatting, laughing, asking about the bikes. Old Man Thompson, who only left his house to gripe about weeds, took a spin around the block with Spike and came back looking like he'd dropped a decade. The kids were over the moon. Their parents were cautious at first, but when they saw the bikers were friendlier than Lisa ever was, they loosened up. Someone brought brownies. I didn't ask questions, it just kept the drinks flowing. Lisa, meanwhile, was glued to her phone calling, texting, pacing. At one point, she stormed over, arms crossed, and barked, "This is unacceptable for our community." I looked at her and said, "Which rule are we breaking?" She faltered, "It's disruptive." Tara, mid-bite a hot dog, said, "So's your attitude, but we tolerate it." A few folks laughed. Lisa turned beet red. "I'm calling an emergency meeting," she hissed. Tank leaned in, locked eyes, and said, "You do that. We'll bring the coleslaw." She spun around and marched off like she expected the sky to smite us. It didn't, but we did turn the music up a notch. By sundown, we'd drawn more neighbors than any HOA event in years. People were connecting, actually talking, joking, living. It was a real, messy, loud community, the kind Lisa had tried to bleach out of existence. I realized then she hadn't just been after Mesh been bullying everyone into dull, obedient silence. All it took was one rowdy afternoon to crack her spell. But that didn't mean the fight was over. The next morning, another flyer was taped to my door. Emergency meeting HOA, President Lisa proposing new noise, guest, and driveway rules. I laughed. She'd seen how fast she could lose her grip, and now she was scrambling to clamp down harder. I wasn't worried not after the biker cookout flipped half the neighborhood against her. But one detail on the flyer caught my eye. Buried in her list of complaints was a jab about dangerous individuals with possible criminal ties. She was trying to smear my friends as thugs to save her own skin. That crossed the line. They'd been respectful, generous. They came to support, not intimidate. I wasn't letting that slide. So I made another call, not to the bikers this time, but to Marcus. Marcus wasn't a writer. Marcus was a lawyer, a damn good one, and he owed me. Years back, I'd rebuilt his vintage Indian's engine for free when he was scraping by. He said if I ever needed him, he'd show up. I told him about the flyer, the accusations, how Lisa was wielding the HOA like her personal militia. He listened, then asked, "Does your HOA charter have anything about abuse of power?" I didn't know, but he said he'd dig. That night, he texted me. "She screwed up. Big time. We'll talk tomorrow." I looked out on my porch, the quiet street, the faint smell of grilled ribs still hanging in the air. Lisa thought she'd shut me down. What she'd done was hand me a legal trump card wrapped in her own ego, and I was about to play it. The next HOA meeting wasn't in the usual community room with stale coffee and metal chairs. Lisa had moved it to her house, claiming safety concerns and recent disturbances hilarious, since the only thing disturbed was her rain. The email invite had her usual frosty tone, but added a warning. No unauthorized guests or non-residents allowed. It was a clear jab on my biker crew, and everyone knew it. But Lisa didn't know I wasn't bringing them this time. I was bringing Marcus. When Marcus walked into her living room, it was like someone cracked a window in a stuffy attic. He wasn't loud or flashino leather, no swagger, just a sharp suit, a beat-up briefcase, and a calm that made people sit up straighter. Lisa pounced immediately, demanding to know who he represented, claiming the meeting was private, saying he was disrupting the environment. Marcus didn't blink. "I'm here as legal counsel for an HOA member. If this is an official meeting about fines or votes, my presence is allowed by law." She had no comeback, not one, that didn't sound like a toddler meltdown in designer slacks. The room was packed more residents than usual, and the vibe had shifted. People weren't smiling at Lisa anymore. They weren't nodding on cue. They were watching, waiting, some with arms folded, others with skeptical squints. The biker barbecue hadn't just made a point, it had woken people up. They remembered they didn't have to live under her boot. Lisa kicked off the meeting with a scripted speech about preserving values, protecting property, and upholding decorum. Then she went hard on outside threats and undesirable influences, her new buzzword for my friends, like they were some plague. When she finally shut up, Marcus stood. He was polite but lethal. He quoted the HOA Charter, Section 7, Article C. Any board member found targeting residents with repeated baseless violations for personal reasons can be removed by community vote. Then he opened his briefcase and handed out copies of every citation I'd gotten months of petty, flimsy nonsense. He didn't need to spell it out. The crowd read them quietly, and you could feel the room turn, like a fog of embarrassment settling in. Lisa tried to cut in, calling it a personal attack. Marcus didn't flinch. This isn't about personality. This is about documented abuse of power, and the charter gives residents the right to act. Then I stood. I kept it short. I told them how I'd inherited the house from my aunt, how I'd come here to heal and start over, how I tried to play by the rules until the rules became a weapon. I said I hadn't fought back with lawsuits or complaints side, fought with kindness, with food, with friends. And if that offended the HOA's idea of order, maybe the order was the problem. The room went still for a long moment. Then Sarah stood and said Lisa had once fined her for leaving her trash can out 15 minutes too long. Thompson said he'd been too scared to repaint his mailbox for years because of Lisa's threats. More stories poured out small on their own, but together, a clear pattern. Lisa knew she was losing. She tried one last stand, claiming everything she did was for the community, that without her, property values would tank, chaos would reign. But no one clapped. No one nodded. For the first time, she looked shaky, maybe even scared. Then Marcus dropped the hammer. If the board's ready, I believe it's time for a vote. Lisa sputtered about needing more notice, citing bylaws. Marcus smiled. Actually, under Section 9, Article D, emergency board actions only need a 51% vote from those present. The vote started hands, rose slowly, then faster. Sarah, Thompson, the shy mom with a newborn, even Chad, the compliance guy, who looked like he was scared she'd bite, but too fed up to fake it anymore. It wasn't close. Lisa was ousted as HOA president right there. She stood, red-faced, shaking, then stormed into her kitchen and slammed a cupboard so hard a glass broke. No one followed. Over the next few days, things moved fast. The board picked a temporary president with a shred of sense. New rules were simple. No petty citations, no porch crackdowns, no Lisa-style micromanaging. People started talking again, sitting outside, laughing. There was even talk of a real block party, not the sterile HOA kind with punch and forced chit-chat, but one with music, lawn chairs, and ribs. I said I'd bring the grill. Lisa's house hit the market 2 weeks Laterno fanfare, just a quiet listing and a moving truck at dawn. She didn't say goodbye. No one expected her to. The next morning, I sat on my porch with my tea and my pig pillow, watching the sunrise. Tank rode by on his bike and tossed me a 2-finger wave. Sarah swung by with muffins. Even Chad gave a polite nod as he jogged past. Peace was back, not the fake, enforced kind, but the real kind, the kind you earn. I thought that was the end. But a few days later, I got a Laterno stamp, no return address. Inside, one typed sentence in that same bland font. You might have won this round. I read it twice, then chucked it in the trash. Because yeah, maybe I had. Or maybe I'd just reminded a whole neighborhood that porches aren't just for sitting theory for living. And no HOA president, clipboard or not, could ever take that away.